Okay, so here I have the ingredients laid out for the dark chocolate ganache. There are 3 ganaches in this workshop. You can feel free to make them all or interchange them based on your desires. I'm using, this is sort of the basic chocolate ganache where we have equal portions of chocolate and cream and a small portion of invert sugar. I'm using glucose as my invert sugar today, but this can be difficult to find at most grocery stores. So you can actually use corn syrup in replacement for your glucose. I do suggest getting clear corn syrup as you'll preserve your colors. But the idea is I want this inverted sugar in my ganache recipe because it helps the sugars in the chocolate stay liquefied, gives the product a nice shine, and gives it a smoother texture overall. So it's not so much for sweetness, it's there to create a shine and a texture. So glucose or corn syrup here. The important thing to know is when you're searching for your chocolate, you need to find chocolate that contains cocoa butter. There's a lot of synthetic chocolate out there that uses different fats that will set in different ways. So I want to make sure that my chocolate contains cocoa butter in it. It's also known as couverture chocolate. You can buy a regular chocolate bar at the grocery store. Just make sure it contains cocoa butter. And I have 300 grams. I'm using this Lindt Dark Surfin brand today. I've got 300 grams of chocolate, 300 grams of cream, and 15 grams of corn syrup. I tend to scale a little bit more because it does tend to stick to the container. So all we have to do is bring our cream to a simmer and then use that hot cream over top of the chocolate to melt the two of them together. When you are making a ganache, sometimes you don't have enough heat in the liquid or enough liquid in the ratios to melt all the chocolate. So it is important to have, I have a pot of hot water here that previously boiled so I can continue the melting process if needed. You can also do that in the microwave, but you would have to use a microwave safe bowl. Okay, so while my cream is coming up to a simmer, I'm just going to get my glucose in with my chocolate. You can also put this to the cream. It does not matter where you're adding it. Just make sure it's in the recipe. A good point to talk about is during this phase, you can always add other flavors. You can introduce other flavors into your heavy cream by steeping items. I usually suggest using Earl Grey tea, a couple tea bags in here, and strain the mixture over top of the chocolate, and you can get some really, really interesting flavors going on. Earl Grey and dark chocolate are a great combination, but I could also put some orange peel in here, cinnamon sticks, spices. You can get really creative with infusions when creating ganaches. So it's the possibility of making your own flavored macarons in any flavor you desire. Starts with the simple ratio of 50% cream to 50% chocolate, with that 10% of it being invert sugar, glucose or corn syrup. Just going to wait for this one to come to a boil. So it might be hard to see on the camera, but I'm seeing that I'm getting some frothing, a little bit of steam, and that is the boil. I don't want to continually boil it because I'll remove a lot of the liquid. I can scald the milk or the cream. So pour your hot cream over top of your chocolate. I tend to give my chocolate a little bit of a shake just so it falls underneath the surface of the liquid. Let it sit for 5 minutes for that chocolate to melt, and then we're going to stir them together. Just going to give this guy a stir. Might look like things are going wrong before they're going right. Just be patient with it and it will come together. Remember, if you don't have enough heat from the cream, you can always put it on top of a bain-marie to finish the melting process. Once this comes together, we do have to allow it to cool, to thicken. You can do this in the fridge or you can do this at room temperature. It's going to take a different amount of time at room temperature, but I find chocolate setting at room temperature slow always has a really nice texture to it. If you throw it in the fridge, it could get a little too firm, so you just have to take it out and allow it to warm up a bit before we can work with it. You can see, nice and smooth and shiny. I don't want to integrate too many air pockets in this, so I'm using a spatula and not a stirring motion like this. I'm just using an agitating motion. And that's my dark chocolate ganache. I can cover this in saran wrap and allow it to set at room temperature. It could take a couple hours, or again, you can hurry up the process by placing it in the fridge. You want this to have the consistency of maybe a peanut butter or a Nutella thickness. So I will show you that once it sets. But that's the chocolate ganache. Okay, so we're going to assemble the passion fruit ganache. I do suggest assembling the ganaches before you make the macarons. They can sit out on the counter for a couple days. They can also be frozen and brought to room temperature before using. So this is something that you can always make in advance. This is a passion fruit version of a ganache, and you can make it pretty much any version you choose. Whatever fruit puree you can get your hands on, just change this and you'll change the flavor. If I change it from passion fruit, you might want to change the alcohol. So I'm using Cointreau, which is a citrus flavored liqueur, but you can swap that to anything that would complement. So if I've got a raspberry, I could do an amaretto as raspberry and almond get along, etc. So what I'm going to do here is just sort of like the dark chocolate ganache. We want to warm up the liquid component, pour it over top of our chocolate to melt it, but also you might need some additional heat from a bain-marie, as this is a small amount of liquid. So I've got my passion fruit puree in my pot. I'm going to turn up my heat. While I'm waiting for that, I can add my glucose to my white chocolate. Again, this is chocolate that contains cocoa butter. This glucose can also be corn syrup. Clear corn syrup is my suggestion. I have room temperature butter that I'm going to add after everything comes together. Now this is different than our dark chocolate recipe, because in the world of white chocolate, it is a very, very soft setting chocolate, meaning it has a lot more cocoa butter in it than dark chocolate. So it doesn't set as firm. So I'm actually going to use the butter to help the viscosity in this. So unlike cream where I've got fat, I'm using fruit puree, so there's no fat present. So I'm going to add that fat component with butter, but it's also going to help me set it, as when butter cools down, it gets firm. Butter is also going to give this a very, very smooth and silky mouthfeel. You might notice a little bit of a difference between fruit ganaches with butter than the cream and glucose ganache for the dark chocolate. As you can see, my passion fruit puree has come to a simmer. I'm going to pour this over top of my chocolate. Again, you can see there's not a lot of liquid there. So when you shake your ganache, it's not going to fall below the surface of the liquid. There's not enough liquid for it. So this is when we do need our second pot. And I have previously brought this one to a boil just to speed this up to finish the melting process. Okay. While I'm melting this, I can add the Cointreau. You can remove the alcohol completely if that's not something you choose. It's for flavor, but you cannot increase it, because if I increase the alcohol, my setting ability of my chocolate will not firm up. So that's the max amount of liqueur you can add. Just going to use the bain-marie's heat to finish this melting process. You can always put all ingredients together in a bowl and melt them over top of a bain-marie. That works as well. I just like to bring the fruit puree to a simmer because it goes faster. And again, this, we have to wait for it to set before we use it. It has to come to a little bit lower than room temperature. So you can put it in the fridge. And then if it gets too firm, let it warm up, or you can let it properly set on the counter. In a couple hours, it will firm up. Again, you can see I'm doing this sort of rocking back and forth motion, not so much stirring to get air in there. And once this finally comes together, I can blend in my butter. Some people use an immersion blender to blend in the butter. It does give a beautiful shine to the ganache. If you choose to, you can. Almost fully incorporated there. Now it is important to have room temperature butter. You can see that my butter is soft. The main thing you're looking for is it'll be too soft if it's really shiny. So room temperature, but not shiny. Okay, so just like that, I can take that off the heat. You always want to make sure to dry the bottom of the bowl so we don't get any water into our product. And then I can take my butter. Now this is a full batch. As I said, it does freeze very well. You can use leftover ganaches in things like tarts, fillings for many things. So the batch sizes are a little bit big for individuals, but everything does store very well. You just bring this together, and then I'm going to cover it with a piece of saran wrap. I'm going to choose the room temperature set. And again, if you need to hurry things up, you can pop them in the fridge for a bit. This is a delightfully sour, tangy ganache. We do need moisture in our fillings of a macaron to soften up that cookie. So that's why we're using ganaches and buttercreams. Curds can also be used, jams, jellies, so on. But it has to contain moisture. Just like that, I can give my bowl a couple taps to remove any air pockets, and that is your passion fruit ganache. Okay, so as you can see, this is the blackcurrant raspberry ganache ingredients, which are incredibly similar to the passion fruit because they are identical. This is just swapping to a different flavor profile. So I have raspberry puree, and to complement the raspberry puree, I've swapped the liqueur to cassis, creme de cassis, which is blackcurrant liqueur. You can see how simple it's going to be. So we're going to do it exactly the same as we did the last one, or the passion fruit one, where I add my puree. Now you can buy frozen fruit puree. Most grocery stores will sell it in the freezer section. You can get it in many different formats, but you do want to make sure that it does not contain sugar, because some fruit purees in cans specifically have sugars, and that's going to affect the flavors of the product. You can also make your own fruit puree. I suggest buying fresh fruit, cleaning it, freezing it, defrosting it, and then either pureeing it or pressing it through a sieve. I suggest the freeze because it actually helps break down the cell membranes and makes it easier to get the liquid components out of the fruit, separating it from the pulp. You can always put it in a blender and strain it as well, but I find the freezing, you get more product in the end. So when fruit's in season, you can make fruit puree. While we're waiting for this fruit puree to come up, we can add the glucose to our chocolate. You can also add the liqueur. I tend to add it with the heat of the fruit as well. Just going to wait for that to come up to a simmer. You don't want to overcook it because you can change the flavor profile of your fruit. So just make sure it's come up to a nice simmer, and that's enough heat. I can always finish the melting with my bain-marie. Smells delicious. Same process as before. Get my bain-marie water going. Finish the melting process on top. You can also swap this chocolate to different flavors if you choose. If you want a dark chocolate raspberry, go for it. Just keep the ratios of the chocolate the same and it will firm up nicely. Beautiful color on this one. You can also add things like zests to your ganaches for some freshness. We're almost done there. Then we can add our butter. And again, just like the passion fruit, this is going to help firm it up with the butter. It's also going to give it a nice velvety mouthfeel and add flavor as well. So remember to always dry the bottom of the bowl. Chocolate and water are enemies. We want to keep them apart. Okay, then I can add my butter. And just work that in until it melts. Again, you can do this with an immersion blender. I'm just going to use my spatula today. I'm going to let this one set at room temperature with the rest. Once they're firm, I can place them in a piping bag. You can also freeze these. You can use them to fill truffles. Many different uses for ganaches. And that is your blackberry or your raspberry blackcurrant ganache. A little bit of butter there. Make sure it's all incorporated. And then set aside. Perfect. Okay, so my ganaches have fully set. So here I have my passion fruit ganache, which I had at room temperature, but because I'm short on class time in these videos, I popped it in the fridge. It does get a little firm, like this raspberry one is a little bit on the colder side, so you can see it just needs a bit of manipulation to soften itself up. Same with this passion fruit. You want to make it just a bit of a pipeable consistency. Aim to be about the consistency of your buttercream or Nutella or peanut butter. Okay, so that this is a great consistency for piping. I could also roll my extra, as long as it's really cold and you've got gloves on, you can roll this into balls, firm it back up in the fridge and roll it in cocoa powder or things like that. But this is what I'm going to be filling my ganaches or my macarons with. And you can see my dark chocolate one, same. If you pop it in the fridge, sometimes it does get a little too firm. So you can use your hand to give it some heat with a spatula, or just allow it to sit at room temperature so that it can soften up again. But you can see that this will be a very nice pipeable consistency. I have some in this piping bag here that I use to fill some of my macarons. Okay, so you can see I can pipe very easily. That's the consistency you're looking for. If it gets too soft because your hands are warm, pop it back in the fridge. It gets too firm, allow it to warm up a bit. So when it comes to ganaches, it's all about temperature manipulation to get it to the right consistency. Okay, so it's going to look a lot like that buttercream. And all extras can be, you can melt it down, put it on top of ice cream. You can scoop it, like I said, into truffles. It can also be frozen. So there's a lot of possibilities for this. Make yourself a nice ganache tart with some fruit. And that's the ganache.